But Brendon, thank you so much for being with us today. I'll begin with some introductions and then we'll jump into questions. And essentially, my name is Shashwat. I am the Editor-in-Chief of the ANU Journal of Law and Technology. The ANU Journal of Law and Technology is one of Australia's leading peer-reviewed academic journals, led by the ANU College of Law students, and it works under the tutelage of the ANU College of Law. And we publish high-quality academic works in the intersection of law and technology. The JOLT also provides a platform for those enthusiastic about the intersection of law and technology, and we host events and initiatives to further the same. And we occasionally invite fantastic individuals like Brendon to come and talk to us and share their interesting work and leading work that they're doing in the country. So introducing the fantastic Brendon. Brendon is presently Australia's Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology. In this role, he leads Australia's international engagement on cyber affairs and critical technology issues while delivering cyber capacity building, crisis response, and resilience across our nation. Brendon is also playing a key role in the development of Australia's cybersecurity strategy for 2023 to 2030, which will enhance Australia's capability to become a trusted and influential global cyber leader. Brendon has a distinguished career in cyber affairs and most recently serving as First Assistant Secretary, Cyber and Critical Technology Coordination Centre within the Australian Department of Home Affairs. He's also served in a senior role in Australia's embassy for the United States. Brendon completed a Bachelor of Arts with Honours from the University of Melbourne and then a Master of Public Policy from the Australian National University. So thank you, Brendon. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Shashwat. It's a real pleasure to come and talk to you.
Fantastic. So, Brendon, we're so keen to know about all the fantastic work that you're doing and how you've come to this point. So we'll maybe begin by talking about your university days and sort of what drew you to a career in this area and how has it led to you becoming the ambassador?
Sure. Well, it's a long story. To go back to my university days, so I've always been interested in public policy. From the time I was a high school student, I felt that working in government or around policy issues outside of government was what I was drawn to. It felt like a way that I could do something meaningful with my career and my life, and it felt that government had a central role in our people's lives, in Australia's place in the world, and effectively the prosperity and security of our country. I'm not sure I would have put it in those terms back then, but I was drawn to working in policy from an early age. So I studied at the University of Melbourne. I majored in politics and literature. When I look back on what I studied, from geopolitics to Australian political history to the range of when you do a Bachelor of Arts, the range of interests and areas that you get to touch on, which I look back and think that gave me such a good grounding in a broad span of policy issues across government. I would also reflect on my my major in literature as being still a big interest for me in my personal life. I read a lot, but I also think that's highly relevant to how I've done my job and how I've worked in international negotiations, because fiction and literature give you such an insight into humans, how humans interact with each other, the nature of our society. So I always think that that was as much a contributor to my professional career as my degree in politics was. So when I finished my time at the University of Melbourne, I applied for graduate programs with the Australian government. I was drawn to the federal government because I felt that was where most of the policy issues I was interested in, and at the time, refugee policies, international relations, our place in the world was what was most exciting to me. So that drew me to the federal government. That said, I moved to Canberra from Melbourne with the intention of staying here for 1 to 2 years and then moving home. But the opportunities, the excitement of work within the federal government has always kept me in Canberra. For years, I worked around refugee issues relating to Australia's humanitarian policies, how we settled refugees in Australia. So the first few years of my career had very little to do with the national security and technology issues that I deal with now. I had an amazing opportunity to do a posting to Jordan for 3 years, which was a really rewarding professional and personal experience working with governments in the Middle East, including the government of Iraq and the government of Jordan at the time, and including with how Australia responded to the refugee crises of that time. Then I got more drawn into the national security world within the Australian government about a decade ago or so, and it became clear to me that technology and cyber issues were at the forefront of our national security policies, we're at the forefront of our posture in the world, and we're at the forefront of how we live as a nation, how we prosper, how we function online, how we take advantage of the digital economy. So for a long time now, I've been focused on the technology and cybersecurity issues, but I came at them from the lateral perspective of not being a computer scientist or a person with a deep technical background, but as someone who saw the major geopolitical implications of how technology markets operate, of how the cybersecurity at a personal, individual, community, business, national level operates. And for me, while I've built up a lot of expertise over the last decade in cybersecurity issues and technology security, for me, it's always about the policy and political implications of those decisions rather than me being someone who's a kind of expert on the tools at doing cyber sort of operations. To come to where I am now, I spent a few years in Washington, posted at our embassy in DC, leading a lot of our engagement with the US government as well as the Canadian government about cyber and technology issues. We continue to have very deep cooperation with the United States. But it was also not just at a government level, but I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley talking to the major technology companies and some of the smaller companies about how what they're designing and the decisions they make in the production, development, deployment of their technology have real life implications for the Australian people, for our prosperity, for our security. And so after that time, I then returned to Canberra and headed up the Home Affairs Policy Division that leads cybersecurity policy for the nation. Also worked on the development of our new cybersecurity strategy, and earlier this year was appointed to the role of Ambassador for Cyber Affairs, based out of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, but with a whole of government mandate to represent our interests internationally. So that's my sort of journey to get to where I am now.
Amazing. I think, Brendon, you said such a good point about how important policy is and how much of an impact it has, especially in the cyber and tech area. And, you know, even for our purposes for law, especially the fantastic part about ANU, because we're so close to government and all the courts, we truly understand how intersecting law and policy and regulation is. And I guess, you know, flowing from that, how do you view the technology and cyber policy landscape? Mm-hmm. And how do you think we need any improvements on it? Do you think we need any catching up to do?
I think we've got a lot of catching up to do. I think technology underpins every aspect of our lives, from our personal lives, how we connect to the internet every day, to our national security. We are subject to hostile state activity in cyberspace. We can see that with conflicts around the globe. For example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the cyber tools were a big part of their military capability. So we have evolved in the use of technology to a really ubiquitous degree in our lives, but we don't necessarily have the types of security, protections, defences that we have come to expect in other parts of our lives. You look at the Medibank and Optus incidents last year. In the Medibank incident, we have publicly spoken about Russian cyber criminals being behind that. A lot of Australians were deeply alarmed and perplexed by the fact that Russian cyber criminals operating from a foreign jurisdiction could reach into Australia virtually, extract deeply personal information about Australians' lives, and then effectively extort them by looking to make that material available on the dark web. That brought home, I think, to this country what other countries have experienced, that there is a lot of impunity when it comes to malicious cyber activity out there. It's not fair to say that the cyber domain is ungoverned or is lawless, because international law, international humanitarian law, other aspects of international law apply to cyberspace as much as they do to any other issues or any other facets of our life. We do have a struggle, though, where cyber criminals know that they can operate with impunity because they're operating out of jurisdictions which effectively offer them a safe harbour. It's very difficult for our law enforcement authorities to get any reach into those jurisdictions. So we have a real challenge with that sense of impunity. We also have hostile state activity, which is crossing the boundaries of what we consider acceptable or responsible behaviour in cyberspace. We've seen malicious state activity targeting civilian critical infrastructure. We are seeing a increasing tempo of activity in our region. For instance, targeting very vulnerable Pacific Island states who are the reason they're being targeted is because of their vulnerability. And so ransomware actors will target a small island state in the Pacific to extort money out of them. So where we are at the moment is that we have not yet got a grip on ensuring that people feel safe and confident online, and that particularly some of our legal provisions and frameworks are applied as actively online as they are offline. For me, that's partly about how we shape the international community, and part of my job is working with international partners, working through the multilateral system at the UN and through other bodies to shape responsible state behaviour in cyberspace, how we hold nations accountable for how they behave in cyberspace. But there's also a really important resilience aspect, and that is about how Australian industry or industry in our regions work to protect their systems and their critical infrastructure, how they invest in cybersecurity. It's also about how we ensure that the technology we buy and that we use is as effective at protecting against some of those basic threats as possible. Unfortunately, a lot of the technology we use in our daily lives at a place like ANU does not have security built in. For an example, we all have Internet of Things devices or smart devices in our home. Most of those are built without any of the basic security protections that could be built in, effectively because technology companies often prioritise functionality, speed to market, rather than actually baking in security. Some of that, like automated patching, no default passwords, is really basic stuff. But because we don't have that built into our technology, it's easily targeted. I look at the current environment and it is too easy for a malicious cyber actor to take advantage of those types of vulnerabilities. Sometimes we talk about sophisticated cyber activity. Most of the time, these types of actors don't need to be sophisticated. They can just take advantage of basic vulnerabilities. So we need to address those types of behaviour, but we also need to address our own defences and our own protections, because at the moment it's way too easy.
I think, Brendon, you touched on so many incredible points, and I think even as a college of law, we've understood how important technology is for the law, for the development of law and our national security directly. And we have courses in cyber warfare and cyber law in general, where we really unpack these issues and understand the gravity of it. And I think you're so right. I think, we've done in our country's Australian government done such good work in terms of, building our capability. Having a role such as yours, having an ambassador for it, it tells that we've come a far way. But I think there's so much more to do. The fact that foreign agents can sit far across the seas and significantly impact us is scary, but at the same time gives us such an incredible opportunity to build our resilience in a better way. But how amazing, Brendon. But Brendon, what do you think, as the ambassador for cyber affairs and critical technology, how do you see Australia's role in the world?
Yeah, I think Australia has a really prominent voice on these issues in the world. We are an earlier adopter of technology. We have incredible research capability. When you look at AI tools, when you look at quantum computing, Australia is a world leader in technology markets. We sometimes undersell our position. We're a big economy. We're an innovative economy. So while we might not have the scale of America's Silicon Valley, we have really strong niche technical capabilities. We sell a lot of our products into global markets. So we do have a credible voice when it comes to technology issues. We're also a very active player when it comes to cyberspace. We have very capable friends of mine at the Australian Cybersecurity Centre who have a great reputation globally in the role that they play in cyberspace. But we also have a really agile regulatory environment. So Australia has managed to pass laws that are the envy of many other countries. As an example, our security of critical infrastructure legislation passed a couple of years ago that said we want to know what our most important critical infrastructure is, and then we want to put in place risk management plans that give us the confidence that the people who operate that infrastructure are protecting against the major cybersecurity risks. A pretty game-changing aspect of that was to say we're not just talking about ports or electricity or water, we're talking about systems of national significance. Now that says what are the systems on which Australians depend on for living their lives on a daily basis, i.e. if those systems broke down because of a cyber attack, what are the systems that would mean we can't get up and do the things we do every day? Now, if you think about it like that, it's telecommunications. It's the payment systems that we use to buy our coffee. It's the transportation systems that deliver food to our supermarkets. What are we doing to make sure those systems are protected so that they are not vulnerable to a cyber attack? In the example we saw in the US a couple of years ago, the attack on the Colonial Pipeline, the attack on the supply of fuel had flow-on effects to every part of people's lives and the economy. So we really think about it in those terms. And there's a lot of countries in the world that look at Australia's approach to these issues and say, we are a world leader in how to ensure we can build up our cybersecurity and resilience. We've also been a really strong voice on the international stage for responsible behaviour in cyberspace. Through a range of UN processes, we have advocated for clear lines which say, for example, attacks on civilian infrastructure, attacks on democratic institutions are out of bounds, and we will stand up and say those are unacceptable. We've been really strong advocates for international cooperation to combat cybercrime. So Australia is active, we are prominent, and we are credible. We often play a role where we're not seen as the US, we're not seen as the EU, we're not seen as China, we're seen as a middle ground country that can represent the perspective of this region in a meaningful and constructive way. So part of my role as the ambassador is to really get out there and underscore our credibility, our prominence and our interest in those forums. And I think we have a good track record of playing a very influential role.
Absolutely. And Brendon, I was thinking we're talking about such incredible topics, but for our viewers, let's understand what your incredible role involves. Mm-hmm. You are dealing with policy, you are meeting with so many stakeholders, but if you have to summarize to us what amazing things you're doing, how would that be?
Sure. Well, traditionally we understand ambassadors as being appointed to countries. So my role is what we call a thematic ambassador, responsible for a policy set of issues. The reason we appointed this role is as I've said, we recognise that so many of the decisions that are affecting Australians' daily lives are being made outside of Australia, either by technology companies or by other states or by multilateral institutions. So we really needed a prominent international voice to advocate for our interests. So in the same way that our ambassador to New Zealand or somewhere else represents our interests over there, my job is to represent our interests in the world of cyberspace, in the world of technology. What that means in practice is that I spend a lot of time on planes. For instance, last week I was in Singapore where I held a range of meetings with our counterparts from ASEAN nations. For some of those conversations with a country like Singapore, who's really advanced in their cyber maturity, that's sharing information about the dynamics that we're seeing. Now, that might see the sort of cyber attacks or threats we're seeing in the region. That might be about how we work together to shape technology so that it's more secure. With a country like Laos, we'll talk to them about how we can help them build up their cyber maturity. So we have the sort of influence game where we're out there advocating for our interests, but we also do a lot of work in Southeast Asia and the Pacific to help build up the cyber resilience of the region. That can mean things like helping them develop legal frameworks against cybercrime. It can mean training to build up their awareness and capability. It can also mean helping them purchase more secure technology. As I said before, this region is quite vulnerable in the increasing tempo of cyber attacks we see. Australia increasingly sees our work to help with cyber issues in the same way as we see our work to help with recovery from a cyclone or another natural disaster. So it's part of what Australia offers to countries within the region. I'm also travelling for the AI Safety Summit in the UK that is aimed at how we shape the development of AI technologies, which are really being released at pace to make sure that those models, that we think about the safety risks and we work with technology companies to mitigate some of those safety risks. So, and I touched on some of our multilateral work. We have a few processes in play at the moment, including the open-ended working group, which is operating out of New York, which is looking to define what responsible behaviour in cyberspace is. We also have a cybercrime treaty afoot, which is looking to increase that international cooperation to combat cybercrime. So I get to do some incredible things, meet some incredible people, work across countries that are traditional partners of us, countries that are less traditional, more emerging partners. I get to work with our Pacific family about how we build up capacity in the region, in multilateral institutions, and also with technology companies. So it's quite extraordinary, the sort of spectrum of things that I get to do, but all of them feel really worthwhile and really quite, sometimes I'm sort of amazed at some of the settings I get to be in and the people I get to engage in, all in the interest of what Australia's sort of values and interests are when it comes to cyber and technology.
That sounds like a very exciting career, Ambassador. And a very good reminder to our students and our viewers that there's just so many breadth of careers that they can pick.
Yes.
And also the fact that we have such an important role who represents our interests in technology and cyberspace around the world. I think it's super important. We need to have a voice as a country, which is lovely. Mm-hmm. But just building on your work in this international relations and sort of, cyber diplomacy and tech diplomacy that you've been involved in, do you think we need better partnerships, in international relation partnerships with other major tech players to improve our cybersecurity and grow our tech industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we traditionally have worked very closely with partners in the Five Eyes, our intelligence alliance. They're really important for us in cyberspace. They're some of the most capable countries in the world when it comes to cyberspace. They help us a lot and we help them with understanding the threat environment, being prepared for major cyber attacks, doing what we can to mitigate them. That's really important. We need to work more in this region. We have great partnerships in Southeast Asia, also with Japan and Korea. But I think when we see the tempo of cyber activity and malicious cyber activity in the region, that for me is a major priority. How we work with partners in the region who are experiencing some of the same cyber threats as we are and build up that resilience of the region. I've been spending a lot of time in the Pacific over the last couple of months. The Pacific is highly vulnerable, of high strategic importance to us, and is really interested in Australia's assistance when it comes to cyber and tech issues. So that's an area where we need to build up. I also am investing a lot of my time in discussions with technology companies. Technology companies make crucial decisions, and I look back in the early phases of the late 90s, the 2000s, when software and personal computing became ubiquitous. A lot of decisions were made at that time, which I think if we had our time again, we'd do differently. In the development of enterprise software, in the development of personal computing software, a lot of things were done which left the door open for malware, and we're now reaping the results of that. That's an area where, as we look at AI, we're very invested in making sure we don't go down the same path where we have AI models that are open for malicious activity, for the data they're using being poisoned or misdirected, that the tools that people develop off the back of the major AI models that the hyperscalers are developing do what we expect them to do. So I think we need to get far more deeply integrated in the way we work with technology companies and not be shy about saying, the Australian government, we might be only one government in the world, but we do have interests. We are coming in partnership with like-minded countries, and we are having an open conversation with industry about what our expectations for security, transparency, diversity in the market, resilience in the technologies that we're using. That's not to say that we want to be heavy-handed or stifle innovation, but it is a conversation that I think we weren't active enough in previous years, and we need to be far more open and willing to make sure that our interests are well represented and that security, safety is built in as these types of products are developed. So it creates a lot of work to do. I think we're on a good pathway, but partnerships are crucial. There is nothing that Australia can do in the cyber and technology world that we can do in isolation because we are a price taker when it comes to global technology markets. That's not to say we can't be a really important influence.
Now, amazing, Brendon. And you know, we were talking about AI and the summit in the UK that you're going to attend. We've seen in the EU they've come up with an AI Act. Do you think that Australia needs a similar version of legislation? Do you think we need better AI regulations at this moment?
It's a really good question, and it's a question that's occupying a lot of people within government at the moment. And our domestic policy leader on that is the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. And that's essentially a question that they've posed. Do we need a specific legislative approach to deal with some of the potential safety and security risks, the ethical risks, the bias risks that come out of AI models? I think AI is already regulated by sector in the sense that if you're deploying technology into medical work or into hospitals that uses AI, you're already subject to regulations about how you deploy that technology. And those regulations talk about the importance of safety, of testing, of validating the technology that you're using. So AI is not an unregulated space. It's as we go through a process of investigating this from the government, and DISA has led a public consultation process coming at these issues, we will see that some elements of AI are sufficiently regulated by existing sectoral regulations. But when we look across at the sort of horizontals of AI, we see that it's a general purpose technology that brings risks that were not necessarily considered in other areas of technology. So we can see that the privacy issues, the implications for intellectual property, the implications for the ethical biases that might be introduced into AI models are not unprecedented, but are unusual when compared to previous applications of general technologies like this. I think where we will get to is to talk about the importance of principles when it comes to AI in the broad. Whether those principles need to be legislated or not, I think is an open question. I think if we can see the major players who are developing the big AI models and then the other players who are deploying tools that are developed off those models, if we can see that they're implementing practices that involve transparency, that involve testing, that involve red teaming, letting security researchers have access to validate that the AI model does what you think it does, that there are appropriate safeguards about malicious use, then principles might be enough, but we can't be complacent about that. Recently, a few months ago, the major 7 AI companies signed up to a set of voluntary commitments that the White House drove in the US. Those are pretty good voluntary commitments. Even a few months' time, we can see that companies are adhering to those, are accountable for those, and are transparent about those. You can foresee that the industry is going in a direction that governments and the public are comfortable with. I think if we do not see sufficient accountability in action, then I think the sort of broader-based regulation is something that governments like ours will consider, while noting that AI deployment in different sectors will already activate some sort of regulatory obligation depending on the sector. So it's a really interesting question, one not easily answered, but one that we absolutely should be asking and continuing to ask as we see the rollout of some pretty amazing, confronting models over the next few months.
Fantastic, Brendon, because I think even at JOLT, we have fantastic articles coming to us about increasingly topical issues of blockchain and Internet of Things that you mentioned, and smart legal contracts. We have autonomous vehicles and smart classes, and all of these are questioning our legal systems. Some of them are appreciating, some of them are critiquing, but there's one sense of theme that we're doing really good, but I think we have to build on our work and keep up with these interesting technologies.
Yeah.
And we've also had some conversations about whether is there really a necessity to always regulate, or whether there's a necessity to emulate what's happening in the EU, for example. But very interesting question, as you said. But as we were thinking, you mentioned, you're hopping on planes, you're talking to people, you're so busy. But how do you like to have fun?
Well, I really think it's important, as you will find as you get older, you get invested in your career, it's actually very easy to forget to have fun and forget to do things that you enjoy and to get too focused on your job or your family. I have 2 young children, so between my job and my family commitments, that sucks up nearly all of my time. I do the one great thing, and children are they're a lot of work, they're very tiring, but they do remind you to have fun. So I actually find at the end of a long day, going home, playing games with my children, getting outside with them is a really great way to turn off, switch off. And my children do not care what my role is, what my title is. They're not interested. They just want to have fun. So I find that's actually a really good way to keep me grounded. That's a big priority for me. I do things to relax. I jog and make sure I sort of get out and exercise. Canberra's an amazing city to actually get out amongst the trees. I went for a walk last night and there were kangaroos near our house. That's not something you get in other major cities. I cook a lot. I find that that's a good way to relax. And I also try and read a lot as well, although I tend to find that when I read at night, that will put me to sleep quite quickly. But my message to my staff for many years has been about the importance of setting boundaries, figuring out how you maintain your enjoyment of your job and of your life, even at times where it feels incredibly busy. There's a lot of pressure on. So I'm a big believer in sort of carving out I'm going to stop work at this time and I'm going to do something else that's fun, and not getting totally caught up in my role as busy as it can be.
That's amazing, Brendon, because I think, and the reason why we love to ask this question is because it always gives us such a variety of, unique and beautiful answers, because it tells our, students, no matter how great you do in a career, you need to have, fun and take your break, which is lovely. But Brendon, what do you think in terms of any advice to students? What do you think students who wish to develop a similar career as yours, or pursuing a similar area as yours of policy and regulation and tech, what advice do you have for us?
Probably have three bits of advice that I think I've learnt. One is the importance of being open to the opportunities as they present. As I talk through my career, I would not have predicted the things that I've worked on in my career, but I've followed the opportunities and I've followed areas that have interested me. And that's really what's brought me over the last decade to the technology world. It interested me and I felt it was meaningful and important. So that's always been the most important driver for me, rather than ticking off, I must do these certain things in my career or I must seek this particular pathway to promotion. I think you do well at jobs that you feel are important and you feel are interesting. My second piece of advice is slightly counter to that, and particularly in the early phases of your career, just do a good job at everything you're doing. I look at some of the jobs I did in the early phase of my career, and they weren't necessarily what I thought I'd signed up for. They weren't necessarily what I thought really, utilised my skills and my brain. But by doing the more tedious tasks, the things that involve preparing sort of briefing packages for ministers and hole punching and putting on sticky tabs and things like that, it's by doing those tasks that you demonstrate your commitment and your reliability that gets you the more exciting opportunities. So I think sometimes we forget that to do the exciting things, we've got to prove ourselves on things that are not exciting. But from my experience, I think I've had a really interesting career with a lot of opportunity to live and work overseas. It shows that doing that sort of hard work gets you really interesting opportunities. The third thing I'd say is it's important to develop expertise. I have done different roles in my career, but when I've done them, I've focused for a relatively substantial amount of time. And you look at the area I'm working in, I've invested a lot of time over the last decade developing deeper expertise and experience around the issues that I work on. Sometimes I see people who kind of flip between different areas, take too many opportunities, and that's fine. We all move around, we all find different things to do. But you've got to feel confident, particularly when you're sitting in front of a minister who's asking you questions. You've got to be deep on your subject matter, right? That doesn't mean you have to spend 40 years doing something, but it does mean you have to spend a few years or several years building up your expertise for you to offer value. I think relatively early on in my career, I could see that because I'd invested the time so that my boss understood that I had expertise on that issue, put me in front of a minister or a Senate committee to talk about that, I really had to draw on deep wells of that sort of expertise. Now I see what I'm doing and I'm briefing or engaging with really senior people across the world. I have briefing packs, I have staff that support me, but ultimately when you're in those conversations, particularly if they're tense conversations, you really have to draw deep on your own experience and expertise. So I think investing the time to develop that depth is also really important.
I think this is a really important piece of advice, to be passionate about what you're doing, just getting into it, developing a specialization into it. I think it's so important. And I think a really good part about, JOLT, which is the Journal of Law and Technology, and the College of Law, is we're really encouraged to think about, what do we like and what do we not like, and in ANU in general, from very early stages of our education, which is beautiful. But I guess, Ambassador, one last question, sort of as we wrap
You can call me Brendon, by the way.
Thank you, Brendon. One last question in terms of the job that you're involved in at this point, and even in most of your, if not all of your career, has been a role of involving a lot of high stakes and a lot of responsibility. Unlike other conventional jobs where a lot of things can end on your table, a lot of decisions or engagements you're making and participating in is creating an impact in a good way most of the times. But have you ever felt that I messed up, and how did you navigate that?
Yes, short answer is yes. I think preparing is key. So if you feel that you have prepared, if you feel that you've exercised your best judgment, if something goes wrong, and you beat yourself up about it, no doubt. And I have created political headaches. I've created international and diplomatic headaches in my time. You beat yourself up about it. But also I remind myself I've been put in this role because my judgment is trusted, and all I can do is do my best and exercise my judgment. And if it turns out that that's not right, then I'm happy to be told that, and I'll try and get better at it. It's easy to sort of sound like you're philosophical about it. Sometimes when things go wrong and it's because you said the wrong thing in a high-stakes negotiation or a high-stakes conversation, or you've put the government in a position which is potentially embarrassing, very unpleasant. There's no doubt about that. But you can always only go back to yourself, confidence in yourself. Well, I've done my best this time. That wasn't good enough. All I can do is get better, learn from those mistakes and move on. Generally speaking, a lot of the crises that we deal in government are things that blow over. Now, obviously, there's high stakes which create ongoing implications, but a lot of the time things feel really bad in the moment, but as you get through it, are not necessarily ending anyone's life or ending your career. So you do have to ride that out and just remind yourself to not. It's not a major human failing. You're not a complete catastrophe. You've done your best. You'll learn from it and get to move on. I think it's important to really draw upon your networks, talk it through with friends, talk it through with family, whoever it is you draw upon. But I always, in some of the situations I go into where it does feel like it's high stakes, I just always remind myself, I'm here, I'm prepared. I've been trusted with this job because people can see that I have these skills and I can go in and do my best, and that's all I can bring to it. So I like to try and sort of, calm myself by thinking those sort of thoughts.
Thank you, Ben. It's so lovely to hear because, people who have been in the position that you are sometimes make mistakes, and students, we make mistakes all the time, and it's good to see that it's human, it's okay, you learn from it, you get better at it.
Yep.
And that's how life goes, and you just kept going at it. And this is beautiful, a beautiful note that we end this conversation. Brendon, thank you so much for joining. Brendon has given us very generous amount of his time. He's been incredibly busy, but the Journal of Law and Technology and the College of Law, we are very thankful, and we've really enjoyed this chat. I think it's really good to know such good things that you're doing, and also a little bit of personal side of your life and your activities.
Great. Thanks, Shashwat. I really enjoy it. Great questions. I'm really glad to engage with you. I think you guys are on an incredible journey and will have fascinating careers as well. So any way that I can offer advice or support, I'd love to do that.
Thank you, Brendon. Thank you. And for our audiences, if you have any questions about any of the topics we've talked about, just write to us at ANU JOLT at anu.edu.au. We also have a website, anujolt.org. And of course, the College of Law has its incredible platforms. But thank you, Brendon, and we'll wrap the conversation.
Thanks very much.